devil was thinking in hell one day that he'd go to earth and a trick he would play. He'd find a deacon and put him down and make him regret the day the Lord he had found. I'll trick him and tempt him and lie, said he, and find out who's best, the Lord or me. The Lord's gonna stand by you. The Lord's gonna stand by you. The devil found the Lord and asked him if he could. The Lord said, devil, I don't believe I should, but I've got a deacon named Job on earth, and he's been mine since the day of his birth. Now he'll stand true and pass every test. So go on, devil, do your best. The Lord's gonna stand by you. The Lord's gonna stand by you.
And country music used to be so good, and I'm just not quite sure what would happen. I sure wish someone would come around and like AI a contemporary Christian country song. That would be outstanding if we knew somebody who could do that.
That wasn't our bro country song from a couple of weeks ago, which didn't really get a lot of traction. I mean, people really didn't get excited about that after all the effort we put into it.
I think people are ashamed to say how much they loved it.
Maybe. I didn't even love it that much, but you know, it was we made the effort, did we not? And that's what's going to happen tonight. We've got some high effort, probably medium ability guys here on the show, but that's good because the effort's going to be outstanding.
Sometimes you're just proud of your kids for trying. You know, like hey, you went out there, guys.
This is upward podcasting, and everybody will get the same non-trophy.
You'll all lose the same 6 followers. Let's put it that way.
Now we have with us tonight, before we actually go to any of them audibly, we've got Noel Henley, a ruling elder. We're ruling elder heavy tonight. That's making no comment on anyone's physical dimensions, but we've got 50-50 ruling elders. Myself, Noel Henley, PCA ruling elder in the I almost said Pacific Northwest. Northwest Arkansas is a little different than the Pacific Northwest. Noel Henley. We've got Dave Cias from Houston. We'll talk about the interstates and other things down there. We've got Reed DePace, a pastor from Montgomery, Alabama. I don't know that he can hear us or we can hear him. But we'll see if he figures out the connection. And last but not least, we've got the only that we know of, the only former NFL player in the PCA, Wilson Van Hooser. A Dutch last name, but very much an all-American young man. And so there we are. And our topic is office and ordination. That's become a thing in the last few weeks. Now, I've written about 15 articles on this over the years. We've mentioned these issues on the podcast, but a non-PCA pastor, I think an independent, has led an effort to sort of expose some the wide variety of practices regarding ordination and deaconesses and that sort of thing in the PCA. But I think we'll focus more on principle tonight and maybe a little history rather than trying to litigate on the internet or embarrass anyone. Although we may let a few people speak for themselves, and I trust that'll be fair. Maybe not altogether balanced, but certainly fair. So let's go ahead and try everyone out here. Noel Henley, ruling elder, why don't you unmute yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your interest in this topic is. And how long have you been a ruling elder? We've talked about this, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm Noel Henley. I'm a ruling elder in Northwest Arkansas in Hills and Plains Presbytery. And I've been ruling elder for about 5 years. I've been in the PCA for about 25 years or so, and have been in a city church, Keller Kellerite Church in Indianapolis. I was there for 6 years, and then moved back to Arkansas. And I was in my current church for a while, and then went to a church plant. And now I'm back with my original church, and got ordained about 5 years ago. Married, three wonderful kids, and my wife's a author, speaker. She's written a couple books for P&R, and I'm a surgeon, orthopedic surgeon.
All right. Well, we got a lot of class on this show tonight, as you'll see as we go around the horn. So thanks for being with us, Noel, and we'll come back to you. And then we've got Dave Cias. You haven't been on the show before.
No, I haven't. First time.
We've been on this. I think I've probably been on a Zoom call with you or something. So I was imagining you'd been on the show, but I couldn't find any evidence of that.
No,
so
and you won't. Yeah, we've done this Brady Bunch thing before. I'm a ruling elder in Katy, Texas, at Christ Church, Katy.
So we need to know, how many lanes of interstate are there at the widest part of I-6 or whatever it is in Katy? Is it really 26 lanes?
No, it's not. It's like 29, but still.
Okay.
Not including the HOV lanes. But it's actually Interstate 10, which runs from Jacksonville, where our buddy Steve Spinnenweber is, or Steven Spinnenweber is, all the way out to Los Angeles. And so it's quite a long piece of concrete. But yeah, it's extra big here in Katy. As a matter of fact, it's so big that anything west of downtown on I-10 is called the Katy Freeway. It's
but the weather's good. The weather's good.
Yeah, hey, we like the publicity. This is what you come to Katy for, is the concrete and the shopping malls and so on. But in any event, I'm a ruling elder in Katy, like Noel, excuse me. I'm a COVID elder, so I've been a ruling elder for about 5 years. I also have 3 awesome kids, the oldest of which is a senior in high school, and so it's dawned on me recently that she may well be moving out within a year or so, and that brings with it its own set of concerns. I mentioned that I'm at Christ Church, Katy, which is the only PCA church in Katy. Even though there's somewhere between 400 and 500,000 people in Katy, we're just a very unusual kind of place. It's very international. We have about 370 members, 6 ruling elders, and a senior pastor that some of you may have heard of. We call him Sweet Fred around here. He has other names in other places. But yeah, I'm grateful to be here. We have an excellent session of guys who just love the Lord and love His church. And our pastors are exactly that same way. We just onboarded a new youth intern, Nathaniel, who we're super excited about, and he's doing a great job.
See, I can tell you're a pretty big church because you're using the word onboarding.
Well, okay, so that's just corporate HR speak, because I just recently started a new job, and even moving into a very small law firm, they have me onboarding things. So that's actually not the church. That's just my day job. And so whereas Noel, gets them out of the ambulance and gets them into surgery, I chase that ambulance right up to the point of the gurney, and I'm stuffing business cards into their mangled hands.
So, do you have any of those bad TV commercials? The law firm.
Oh, so sure. Let me make some recommendations. And they're mostly radio commercials. But if you want to do a Google search for Jim Adler, the Texas Hammer, he is an institution, and he has been around for so long that his son is now modulating his voice that way to sound like Yosemite Sam on crack. But go look for Jim Adler, the Texas Hammer. I don't personally have those because that's not the kind of lawyer I am, but I would.
Well, see, the honesty is refreshing. We appreciate that. And then we've got Wilson, where everyone knows Wilson, Mr. Excitement, Mr. Enthusiasm, and but you're going to have to unmute yourself to share any of that with us, Wilson.
I'm just here to pump you up.
No one doubts that.
Yep.
And
Can
you were
can I be like Marshawn Lynch tonight, and that's the only thing I say? It's just this. I'm just here to pump you up.
Hey, I found that someone sent me a video. Well, my brother-in-law sent me a video when we were in Ireland a year and a half ago. We went to this sheepdog farm. It's like an attraction, just a farm. Pay a couple of euros, and you see the sheepdogs. And on one of these ESPN shows, or NFL Network, something, Marshawn Lynch went there. The same exact place that we went. It was very interesting to watch. I don't think my visit was as exciting as his was. But speaking of Marshawn Lynch, so you're a pastor in Oklahoma. Where is it?
Stillwater.
Stillwater. All right. And you're not a former RUF guy. You just seem like one. Is that right?
I am former RUF. Go Pokes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I can't keep it straight.
Yep.
All right. I'm not sure we've got Reed. Reed, can you hear us? All right. Speak to us, Reed. He can't hear us. Or he's very bashful, which is not the Reed I know. Well, maybe Reed will he'll figure out a way to get in. But he's a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, and maybe someone maybe Resby, try to help him in the private chat, and maybe we can get him connected. Make sure we got the right speaker and mic for him. All right. So, how do we view? And Wilson, we sort of tagged you first for the show. We have something of a controversy in the PCA right now, and it was prompted by the internet. Amazingly enough, can you believe it? And my preference has always been to focus on ordination. I think that's critical to office, and our BCO says so. And amazingly, in the last couple of years, we passed an overture, and it was ratified pretty easily, that says you can't use the titles of office for people who don't hold the office. You can't use the titles associated with ordained office for people who aren't ordained. And there was almost no debate when it passed in 24, and then or 23 or 4, and then it was ratified the next year. There was an effort, and we'll see a clip from that, to oppose it, and that was very revealing, but it passed. So that's the law of the PCA. And to me, the fact that a few churches don't ordain one of their offices is more worrying than some non-standard terms and usage and creativity from other churches. And I think church politics, like all politics, are the art of the possible. And incrementalism is okay, and building consensus and educating, because I think we can talk about this later. We don't teach much or say much about the doctrine of ordination and its importance. So for all those reasons, I'm content to work on this, but maybe not in the way that internet activists are, although you may call me an internet activist. That's fair enough. But how would you, Wilson, describe this controversy, such as it is, in the PCA to someone new to your church, or someone, a Baptist, heaven forbid, down the street, who might ask you this question?
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're coming out of Baptist captivity, so we'll see. But I think it's clear. I've been telling a couple of people this. It kind of reminds me of the whole Chad Powers TV show.
Now,
And
you're going to have to explain this for someone who's almost
yes,
a boomer, but not quite.
yeah. So if y'all remember, I can't remember if it was Jared Goff or if it was Eli Manning who did the very first one. But basically, what they did was they disguised themselves as. Oh, there we go. Reed's
Can
here.
you
So
hear me?
we got the Montgomery presence. So
Hello.
Eli
Yes, sir.
Manning.
We can hear you, Reed. We'll come to you.
So Eli Manning disguised himself as just a normal, everyday walk-on quarterback trying out for the Penn State football team, and he had the name Chad Powers. And the whole thing was, here's Eli Manning, a Hall of Fame quarterback, who looks frankly ridiculous, and he's trying out as a walk on. But the whole thing, and now there's this big Hulu TV show. I forget the actor's name, but they've turned
Glenn Powell
Glenn Powell, thank you.
of Twisters.
I love it. Out of dealing with Oklahoma. Now, the whole thing is, everyone knows that's like, when Eli Manning is seen, it's like, yeah, that's been Eli Manning all along, and it's kind of humorous that he dresses up as Chad Powers. In a lot of ways, it feels like the same principles, that we're using terms and we're using descriptions of people that is kind of Chad Powersing people to look like, act like ordained offices, but are not in the ordained office. But I think you're right, Brad. It gets back to the original doctrine of what is the laying on of hands, what is ordination.
Yeah, and quasi office is the term that I often use. And I want to ask Dave real quick. Dave, unmute yourself. I mean, you're in a church with a pastor who's going to teach polity, but a lot of people in the PCA, I think they come in, especially if maybe they come in via a church plant or something like that, and they don't know anything about Presbyterianism, and they might have officers or a pastor who know something but aren't particularly convinced of its value and don't pass it along. Or maybe they intend to do it one day after the church has sort of grown up. But I think people in that situation are particularly vulnerable to misunderstanding. So, you're a lawyer, words matter. Some of this smacks of postmodernism, but what do you think about people getting the wrong idea about these things?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up, Brad, because that's actually one of my biggest concerns about all this. And you're kind to reference our polity-oriented pastor who, as a matter of course, does his devotions out of the BCO. Nevertheless, there are plenty of folks in our church, and even maybe in our diaconate, who just aren't. They're just not as savvy to these things. And so if you can be in Fred Greco's church and not be keyed in, now part of that is, Wilson, to your comment about recovering Baptists, Texas is extremely Baptist. And I would, if I'm betting my own money, which I never do because I don't bet, I would guess that somewhere in the neighborhood of 85 to 90% of the people in our church are former Baptists. And so coming from a Congregationalist model, they don't have any frame of reference for this kind of polity, and so on and so forth. But to get to your question, Brad, what people see, what laymen see, what disengaged deacons see. I don't want to throw elders under the bus, but I'll be honest with you. I've known plenty of elders over time, not just the last 5 years, but over my time in the PCA, who are just not that engaged beyond the local church. And so they may be Presbyterians and Presbyterian elders, but functionally they're Congregationalists. And it's fine to be preoccupied with the needs of the local church. As a matter of fact, I think that needs to be where we begin and where a lot of our focus goes. Nevertheless, when you see some of these things, these events, these videos, or even in your own church, where you see folks doing things behind the pulpit, whether it's reading or praying or quote exhorting or pronouncing this or reading that, or distributing this particular element or that one, it sends a message about who is an authority in the church, who has been ordained in the church, whatever you think that means, especially if you come from a tradition that has a different sense of ordination. It's very concerning. It's just not, it's not the direction we want to go. And without getting too deep into it, thinking about, something like 1 Timothy 3 or even Titus 2, it's not just the qualifications for elders or what it is that that Paul tells the older ladies to do with the younger ladies, it's also that these things are supposed to be a witness, that they're supposed to be a testimony to others, where, for the older women, they're supposed to be helping the younger women learn how to be good, godly, wives and mothers and so on, and see to the household economy, so that the word of God would not be reviled. And likewise with men, that, an elder should be well thought of by outsiders, right? And so we see this concept of testimony coming down from those in the church who are either going to exercise authority or who are going to be role models and leaders for others. This is a testimony not just to those outside the church, but to those within the church who might not otherwise understand the polity. They may not do their devotions from the BCO.
Yeah, we hear a lot about contextualization, and I like to say the first and most important context that we operate in is that of a PCA church. We have a prescribed polity, and it's really what holds us together. We're not really allowed to take exceptions or be granted, state differences. We may state differences with the BCO, but if we don't follow it, we're liable to legal process, and that's just that's the way it is. That may not be the way everyone likes it, but that, in fact, is what we are dealing with, and I think really what most Presbyterian churches have always dealt with. Noel, any thoughts on the whole importance of properly communicating and portraying things to the people in the church?
Sure.
I notice a lot of churches, they got their logo on the stage, and there's a lot of self-promotion, internal promotion, kind of corporate PR within the church. But I think they understand it's important, but I don't think we're always, the truth in advertising in the church is not always what it should be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, our new members class is called Distinctives. I think our church does a good job and has over the years trying to illustrate how we are different. And in a Baptist context, that's super important. And I think that we can always do much better by bringing in the standards, bringing in education on things that the members may not see ever. I mean, they may hopefully never be under discipline, never be meeting with the session for some horrific problem, but they need to know how that functions and the benefits of it, the blessings of it for the church, and even the things that we take for granted, we need to communicate and bring up from time to time, and of course, the congregation will see ordination rarely, occasionally, maybe more often with deacons, maybe, which is great. But we can do that educationally as well, and find ways to talk about these things. And I think we can always do a better job.
All right. So the PCA is unique, sort of, in that we're a two-office church. We only have two offices, which to me makes proper definition of those offices and ordination to those offices very important. We have elders, two classes thereof, not a separate office of minister and ruling elder, but separate roles or orders within that single office. And then we have deacons. We only have two sacraments. So it's important to get them right, and it should be doable to get two right, since we don't have, 7, as the Roman Catholic organization does. But we only have two offices. But the question is, why is office a big deal? Well, Dave, you talked about Fred Greco, and of course we've also heard this joke about Mel Duncan, that they do their devotions in the BCO. But the most overlooked part of the BCO is the first part, the first paragraphs, the first page, which I have on screen, Jesus, the King and Head of the Church, and then the preliminary principles. It really is, and I mean, it's the most important part because it's right at the beginning. That's why it's there. And there's a lot about office in the very first page, and it's all under the heading of Christ, because the offices are the way, one of the main ways that Christ ministers to the church from the right hand of the Father, but ministers to us in the world now. And I think if you read the first pages of the BCO, you can see what a big deal it is. Let me just read a couple of snippets. Nope, I just lost magnification there. And we read in there that Jesus, being ascended up far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things, received gifts for his church and gave all offices necessary for the edification of his church and the perfecting of his saints. We might also add caring for his saints, because that's primarily what deacons are to do. Elders care for the soul and the organization of the church, and deacons care for the physical needs of people. And in our society, where we have prosperity and we have buildings, they care for the building, for the funds, for the things that the church own and need to operate in the world, and they do that to relieve the elders of this responsibility because of the importance of that office. Deacons, we should just go ahead and say, since we can, are not junior elders. Every good deacon is not going to become an elder one day. They're two different offices, two different giftings. But it's not to say that someone who is a deacon may not be found to have the gifts of an elder and become an elder. That often happens, but it's not to be expected or automatic. So the first paragraphs of the BCO continue. Jesus, the mediator, the sole priest, prophet, king, savior, and head of the church, contains in himself, by way of his eminency, all the offices in the church. That's elder and deacon. That's ruling elders and teaching elders and the deacon. It's not, we don't exactly believe in every member ministry as it's conceived in the megachurch. We do believe there's something special about the offices and that they're given by Christ. That's the most important thing. A couple more paragraphs. This is the bottom of the first page of the BCO. Christ as King, it's reiterating, Christ as King has given to his church officers, oracles, ordinances, and especially has he ordained therein his system of doctrine and, listen to this, government. So polity is ordained by Christ, discipline, worship, all of which are either expressly set down in Scripture or by good and necessary inference may be deduced therefrom. That's right out of the confession. And to which things he commands that nothing be added, and that from them nothing be taken away. Now, we usually think about that in doctrinal terms, but this implies, if you read the antecedent, it applies to the offices of the church. And then it reiterates again, since the ascension of Jesus Christ to heaven, he is present with the church by his word and spirit, and the benefits of all his offices are applied effectually by the Holy Ghost. So that primarily talks about the preaching and teaching office, but it refers to all the offices of the church. It's a big deal because it's a big deal. And in our polity, we do believe that ordination is central to our, it's inseparable from our doctrine of office. You can't have office without ordination, and you only ordain officers. So, Wilson, what do you know and think about ordination, and what do you think of the BCO definition of it that we have here on screen?
Yeah, I mean, it's about as rich as it gets. Very much a neglected doctrine. George Gillespie said ordination makes men ministers. And we see that ordination is referred to in the scriptures 4 times to the laying on of hands. Acts 6 verse 6 is the laying on of hands for deacons. Acts 13, verse 3, 1 Timothy 4:14, 2 Timothy 1:6 are 4 instances. And I love what James Bannerman says. If done in a right spirit, you're talking about ordination, it will not be without the presence and peace of Christ, owning his own institution and blessing his own ordinance. So this is very clearly a very important thing. And dare I bring back my Chad Powers illustration? If we're being very unclear as to who is and who is not ordained, I think that's a problem. Even addressing the whole, if people don't want to ordain their deacons, would we dare consider not practicing one of the sacraments? So there are some big omission issues that we need to handle, but we also need to make sure that I think sometimes it's interesting the charge that some ministers or elders are accused of as being legalistic by wanting to push back against women having these labels. I mean, the irony is putting those labels on someone and not being ordained, or kind of a pseudo ordination, is a type of a legalism. It's trying to do the letter of the law, not following the spirit of the law. And so I think, the doctrine of ordination really is the most key part. And that's what we got to really recover, the fact that it is something the Lord blesses. It's something that is to be held high, and to be very clear to the church that these are the men who are ordained, and they are ordained ministers of Christ. We're not talking about priest or Roman Catholicism. That's a straw man. I mean, this has been very clear for 2,000 years. So,
All right. So we would not allege that. Now, there was a video years ago from a PCA pastor who had come into a large church in New York City from the EPC. He is now out of the PCA, but he did in fact lay hands and ordained female deacons in a church. And they said, well, he didn't know any better, and they apologized. That's the only instance I know of where hands have been laid on females in ordination to a so-called office in the PCA. I don't think that's really a problem, because most people do understand it's a big deal. I think I've seen a video or two. I've looked at a lot of videos over the years. People send me stuff, and then I've got to be polite, so I look at it. And I do think I've seen maybe one other service where it sure looked like there was laying on of hands for ladies who were being called, I don't know if they're being called deacons, deaconesses, or something else. But this is not a big problem. We don't have people who aren't supposed to be ordained being ordained by the laying on of hands. The bigger problem is that we have some people who should be ordained who are not being ordained. And that is that's an issue in my view. This is not which hymnal you use, or whether you have bongos or an organ. There's choice and freedom in those areas. I don't think there's freedom with our two offices and their definition. And I've made the point more than once in written material that it's pharisaical legalism to just barely follow the BCO, but then visually contradict it, and by the way you represent people in roles and offices. So yes, that's a problem. Dave, this sometimes strikes me as postmodern because the words don't necessarily mean what they're not. Their definition and their usage are two different things. And I guess in your world, you'd better have the right documents, words in the document, or somebody's going to lose some money.
Well, that is true. And the kind of lawyer I am is the kind of lawyer who deals with contracts and documents all day long. So I get it. A different thing I get, and we don't really deal with postmodernism in the legal world in any sort of direct way. One of the things we deal with is attempting to sort of fight the last battle, so to speak. So in my career, I've helped my clients, buy and sell assets and companies. That's just what I've done for a dozen years now as a lawyer. And nobody really cares about that, except that all these things are governed by controlling documents, and everything has a definition. And sometimes you have definitions of words that the common meaning of which are clear to essentially everybody but the lawyers. And so, when we get down to it and we're trying to define words and we're trying to figure out how to parse everything out, we have these controlling purchase documents where if you pull a lever in Article 12, that changes something significantly in Article 3. And then if you change something in Article 4, then that really affects the definition over in Annex 1. And if you change a different definition in Annex 1, then that completely rearranges what you've done in all the other articles and definitions. And I'm not going to bore anybody by reciting that this is literally what I was working on today for a client. But there is something analogous here to our BCO, which is interconnected, and things that happen in certain parts of the BCO affect things that happen in certain other parts of the BCO. And when you talk about the definitions and so on, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is, and this is an unpopular point, especially considering that we had, over 50, or we had 50 overtures this year. This is not something we're going to be able to fix by passing or adopting or ratifying new amendments to the BCO. Now, and that's not me saying that that there are amendments that are useful and important and helpful. There are. But if we think that we're going to be able to define this to the point that there is no latitude for somebody to not ordain a deacon or a diaconate so that they can now have some kind of deacon-esque or deacon-esque kind of board, where they say, they shrug and they say, nobody's ordained, so everybody's okay. You're not going to be able to do that. And what it requires is us as elders actually doing one of the tasks of elders, which is to stand on the Word of God and the Westminster Standards, and what we have in the BCO, and actually applying the rules as written, and doing the right thing. For so long as you have rules, especially the more intricate they become, the more Talmudic you get with them, and the more you parse things out with them, the more sort of loopholes or places that you're going to be able, like you said, Brad.
It's Corbin. It's Corbin. What do you mean? Come on, Corbin. There's no precedent for this. There's none. Jesus didn't deal with this at all.
Right. Yeah, but the more you do that, the more opportunity there is to parse it out to the point where you're really wondering, how many teaching elders can dance on the intincted communion wafer. There's no limit there as far as how intricate you can get as a way of coming right up to the line of what everyone else knows is unacceptable, or crossing the line. And what it takes is a presbytery to draw the line and say, I know that you're my friend, brother. I know that I respect you deeply, Father in the faith, but this is not what we're supposed to be doing. And we need to have the will to step forward and do something about it. And I realize that doesn't address your postmodern comment, Brad. I'm just a humble lawyer. I don't get into all that Jacques Derrida stuff. That's just not my bag. But
I'm sure I don't know that much about it. I just know that the definitions of words are not malleable. It's just they mean what they mean, and especially in any sort of organization or legal framework. If you're if you're hyper relational, and that's the way you operate, let's get along and let's be happy with each other, no matter what. Yeah, you're going to let everybody do their own thing. But if you believe your polity and your order is biblical, you're going to try to follow it. I guess that's my perspective. Let me see if we can hear if Reed has straightened out now. Unmute yourself, Reed, and let's see if we can hear you and you can hear us.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, all the way from Montgomery. We used to say that Resby had this internet wire that ran from the pole to his house, and sometimes the possum would dangle on it. Maybe that's what was happening to you down there in Montgomery.
They've run my possums out of Bayside. They're all groundhogs now. It's just unbelievable.
So Reed, we got to get the graphic off the screen so we can see your James White-esque garb.
Yeah, I'm in competition for the what's our ruling elder brother's name? Who every General Assembly.
Bob Mattis.
Yes, I'm in competition for the Bob Mattis Award for next year. So I'm in training right now.
Well, thankfully you don't have that much competition, but the competition you have is pretty stiff.
Pretty stiff.
So you've been listening to this point, but I'm sure you have something to say. You're an internet stalwart. I can remember way back in the early 2000s when I first stepped into the Reformed Internet. There was a Reed. You went by Reed here.
Yeah, that's me.
And the Green Baggins blog and all that stuff. Some of you weren't born when the Green Baggins blog was a thing. Lane Keister, then PCA, now OPC. But let's hear from you, Reed, because you've been working on this. And what we haven't mentioned is this the newly made up title, maybe 30 years, Shepherdess.
Right.
And it doesn't have, you can control F all day long in the BCO, and you will not find the word deaconess, and you will not find shepherdess. You find shepherd as a verb, I think, in the BCO. I wrote about that, and I don't remember what I wrote. But when you start using non-standard terms and equating them with officers, and not everyone who uses that term is using it for what I would call a quasi-officer. We'll talk about that. There are kind of two kinds of shepherdesses. But really, there's as many kinds as there are churches that use the term because it does not have a standard definition. So any thoughts you have on anything we've talked about so far? And I know you've been thinking about the shepherdess issue.
Yeah, I've got three considerations that have kind of been boiled down for me a little bit watching the discussion going on. The first one is sympathy with churches, elders in particular, is trying to figure out what does women's ministry look like and how does it function. We would all agree there's certain scriptures. I'm thinking of Titus 2, 3, and 4, and others, which talk about the idea of women's ministry, women to women, women to children. We can build a basic case that there's got to be some sort of expression. And when the PCA started, that was predominantly expressed through something called Women in the Church, a different form of WIC than what the federal government provides for those who need the extra help with the monthly food for the kids.
Less cheese.
Less cheese, yes. And so I think we need to recognize that some of this is a struggle to rightly address, quite frankly, in a different cultural context a little bit. The longer I'm in ministry now, the more I think postmodernism is really significant and relevant. We're just in different territory. You can throw in their feminism. By the way, I want to recommend a book. I don't know if you all can see that. That's James Boardwine. He was at Westminster in Vancouver, Washington. I don't know if he's retired now or not, but the Pauline Doctrine of Male Headship, the Apostle versus Biblical Feminists. This was published a long time ago. It was republished in like 2009. and well worth it. Great exegesis on the key passages that we all debate. But the second issue that really pushes into the shepherdess thing is, I think most of these folks, aside from not doing a deep dive into what is the exegesis of what does it mean for women's ministry in the church, how does that look like, what is it, what are its functions, how does that express itself, aside from that not really being paid attention to very much, I think there's a huge disconnect in understanding that just because you don't follow the form, that would be follow the BCO procedures, et cetera, that doesn't mean that you're not therefore also performing the functions. And so you have a king in the Old Testament, Uzziah, who he doesn't have the title of priest. He's not about to usurp the form there. He's not going to be ordained as priest, but then he takes it on himself to do one of the functions. And he ends up with leprosy the rest of his life. The idea that God expects us, we could go back to Nadab and Abiram, the brothers, with their strange fire. God ordains not just the forms, in this case, church governance. He also ordains the functions that are going to be used. And I think if I could bring up the third one, and this might be the one that's frustrating for people, I think that, and this happens among evangelicals in particular, the normative principle shows up everywhere. We don't have to fall into a regulated principle of government to get this. But the Westminster Confession 5, paragraph 3, in his ordinary providence, God makes use of means, yet he is free to work without, above, and against them as he pleases. And we need to recognize that there is a boundary to what God has given, where you started with the idea of King Jesus. I looked at Turton a little bit today, and he referenced the idea of certain titles and how those all reflect the authority of Christ being given to ministers with this intentional promise. The Holy Spirit will use them in the work of the means of grace. We have the instruments of grace, the ministry of the word, the ministry of the second, ministry of prayer, but then we have this broader context. Westminster Shorter Catechism and the Larger Catechism questions talk about the ordinary means, particular or especially, of which are these three instruments, which means that if we, in some sense, can look at the whole ministry of the church and say, that's the means of grace the Spirit's promised to use. And while he can do anything he wants to save people, we are limited to expressing our faith using the authority he's given to us in the explicit things he's commanded. And we're not allowed to add. I might also add Westminster Larger Catechism 99.4, the 8 principles for interpreting particularly the moral law, but then it applies beyond that. And the idea of reciprocity, when something is commanded, the opposite is forbidden. When something is forbidden, the opposite is commanded. And so in commanding male-only eldership and then specifying, and these are the ministry functions of that male-only eldership, well, then that disallows all the other forms. Recently, I saw some comments, Brad, where some people are having a parallel form. We might even call it a shadow government form of ministry, where you have the elders, the male board, and then the women, the shepherdess board, and they coordinate with each other so that the elders are the ones who take the final votes on anything, the male elders, but they listen to and they end up debating, they end up discussing, they end up essentially, when it comes to the women, doing whatever the women's ministry wants them to do. And
yeah, I saw a flow chart, and I think Michael Foster posted it, but a friend of mine went and found, he knew what church it was from, and he found it and sent it to me, and it actually had the deacons under the women's committee. That's who they reported to.
Correct.
So let me give a little sense of the range of this shepherdess term, because we've jumped into that. A lot of this is about deaconesses and female deacons and unordained male deacons, and it's very confusing. It occurs to me when a church is doing something right and proper by the book, it's actually very easy to explain that, because you look at what the book says and what they're doing, and you can say, well, this is what they're doing, and explain it. But as I've looked into these things for many years, even to the point of writing letters of complaint or helping someone write charges on various things, some of these things are so messed up and non-standard that you don't even know where to begin. Dave, you've probably had a legal problem before where there were so many things wrong, you didn't know where to start. And there was just a lot going on. And that's what we've got in some of these churches. But the shepherdesses in particular, I think it was Harry Reeder when he was in Charlotte that first started this, and I think he took it to Briarwood. He had a group, I think, unfortunately named Shepherdesses, and they were simply to kind of women counseling hurting women, grieving or other problems, maybe some physical problems, health problems. And there's nothing wrong with that. It sort of reminded me of what I used to hear about in the main line, the Stephen ministry, which was males and females. But that's what it reminded me of, kind of a conservative version of this Stephen ministry, which was, I don't know if that was branded or if it was, I think it was kind of denominational. Some of you will know about this. But that's one kind of shepherdess. And I think it's because of the shepherding function of the elders. Using that term, I think, is unwise and subject to misunderstanding. So that's one kind. And then we have shepherdesses in PCA churches that, reading between the lines and from the best we can tell, they are shadow elders. They're shadow ruling elders. They attend every session meeting, or they sit on every committee, and they would not have a vote if the order is being followed. But they have a great deal of influence. I mean, if you're the kind of man who loves and respects women, and you have these female council board shepherdesses. Nobody calls them shadow elders or quasi elders or eldresses. It's interesting. We have deaconesses, but we don't have elderesses. So to this point, but it's going to be hard to deny what seems like a vote to people, I think, or to be rude to them, or to just say, no, we have to do it this way. You maybe you even need to leave the room. We're going into executive session and we've got to make this call. It would have to change the dynamic dramatically. So we have that. We have shepherdesses, women's council advisors. Some of them call them women's advisors, but they look a lot like, to me, cynically, as shadow elders, quasi elders, and so let's talk. I think that's the problematic part. I don't think that it's the term as much as, like Reed said, the role, the function. So, Noel, have you had any experience with this or observations?
Well, I have a surgery story.
Is there blood? There will be blood.
No, there will be blood. Most of us who do specialized training, and mine was hand surgery, we have a mentor who we loved and who really shepherded us in that training. And one of our surgeons that trained us was like that, and just super dedicated, but very hard on us.
Well, I got to break in. This is too good, I think. Have you ever, for a thief, have you ever removed a hand, just cut one off? A healthy hand?
Never have.
Okay, well, that's something that's a new line for you, maybe.
Appreciate that. And so this guy's name is Bill. And so one day we're doing surgery, and I put the dressing on at the end, and then like I usually do, and Bill had left the room by that time. And when we had our next clinic the next day, the patient came in, and the bandage was digging into her arm. very uncomfortable. And so we fixed that. But she was, mildly upset. It wasn't a big deal, nothing dangerous. But Bill took me aside and he said, "Noel, these are real people. As surgeons, we get in our brains that we're doing the right thing. I cut where I'm supposed to cut. I do the surgery the way I'm supposed to do it. And as long as I do the right thing in my surgery technique, everybody's happy. But we tend to forget that just by making that bandage a little too tight or the edge was in the wrong place, that disrupted that person's life, even for a brief time. And so I think we got to remember that these people, these women, I guess in these situations, I mean, we could talk about unordained men, but these are people who have expectations and desires, and they have the temptations where they say, "I love the title," or I love the attention, or I love being consulted, and these kinds of things.
Well, in nearly every other arena, titles are important.
Yeah, sure. And so we have to use caution when we give people these roles. And I think in an article that I read in preparation for this, it talks about, a session can arbitrarily just remove one of these people. It's a made up office. There's no accountability at the presbytery level. There's no vote that has to happen. So the more loosely attached to the polity these men and women might be, I think the worse it is, the more dangerous it is.
Yeah, imagine, of course, Dave, you may have a thought on this. The reason church members, or even the holders of these, the bearers of some of these titles, which aren't found in the PCO, the reason they would consider themselves to be officers or be considered to be officers by others is that in some cases, I've seen it, I think it was Redeemer, New York, they had one form to nominate elders and members of the diaconate, which was unisex, male and female. There was no differentiation. You're elected the same way. You're examined the same way. I have seen this, female deaconesses, or maybe shepherdesses even, being installed, and they have vows that are about 80-85% identical to the elders and the deacons, but not exactly. Who's paying attention to that in the congregation? Sometimes there's an attempt to explain it. Sometimes it's on the website that they're slightly different. Sometimes it's not. I think you pastors and all of us, that you can say something that you think is clear and that everybody ought to get and understand, and nobody gets it. That happens over and over again. If it quacks like a duck, it could be daffy. So that's everybody should know that.
We all know it's the Aflac duck. Let's just.
Okay, well, I'm dating myself, which some of you guys probably did that in high school, but most of you are pretty cool guys. Probably didn't go that way. But I know some of you had girlfriends at other schools, so to speak, but you've all moved beyond that and married up and been blessed, as all Presbyterian males are, especially elders. I've noticed this over the years. But people can get the idea that that they hold an office or a role that's so close to an office and that's made much of, that they can be forgiven for having the expectations that you talked about, Noel. But some are appointed by the session, some are elected by the normal process. They have the votes for the shepherdesses and the deaconesses on the same day and in the same meeting as the elders and the deacons. That sends a message. I think if you're going to have roles that you might, someone asked, what's the difference between commissioning and ordaining? Well, there is no definition of commissioning in the PCA. So there's a great difference, or it may seem that there's no difference, and that's the problem. It's just it's a non-standard term. Wilson?
Even in some ways, if people want to say, well, technically we have a distinction between a committee and a commission, then okay, we can take that. A commission, by definition, in that context, has the authority to act on behalf of the body. So to commission is to have authority. And so I think there's just so many ways in which the ground just kind of is falling underneath this. Actually, one of our deacons who's listening to the show, deacon, not deaconess, he texted me this, and I thought this was a wonderful thing.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Michael can he can go look at our website. Actually, don't. We probably need so many updates on that. But he brought this is a really good point. He said James 3:1 is really helpful here. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. I think that's a big point here, is that people in authority in the church are judged with a greater strictness, not a looseness of terms that are used. I think
So you brought up authority, and some people say the deacons have no authority at all, therefore they don't have to be ordained, or therefore we can have men and women serving as deacons since women are not. I mean, this is a complementarian thing, okay? Most of the people that have deaconesses or female members of the diaconate or female deaconing persons, that's one of the ways Tim Keller used to describe it, say that they don't have any authority. But our PCA, BCO actually implies in two ways. First of all, that there's a congregational vow that the congregation will obey the deacons in appropriate ways, not in anything. Not you wash your car, that's not appropriate. But help us fix the sidewalk if you can, and if you're able. You should obey that if possible, and if reasonable and righteous, as with anything else, if in line with biblical principles. So maybe the PCA is unique in having this principle. It's narrow, it's limited, but we do have a principle of authority for deacons, some authority, and some people don't say, I don't agree with that, so I do this or that, or I don't do this or that. And that's where the problem comes in. There's a way to change our order.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It takes a lot of work and a lot of persuading. It's much easier just to violate it. But the principal thing to do is to work to change it and to be honest in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, I think very clearly you see that in 1 Timothy 3 and Acts 6, the deacon clearly has authority. But then even in our own question number 4 of the vows for the deacon, do you accept the office as deacon? And then it goes on to finish it and said, do you promise to set a worthy example before the church of which God has made you an officer? I mean, that's very clear there. And, I think that's the, who was the Little League baseball player who was like, he was like much older, and he was the pitcher and just was like, I mean, he was just like mowing kids down from the mound. And
it was the most compelling Little League World Series we'd ever seen.
Yeah.
Again, cheating in baseball does make for a more compelling product.
Hold on. So, allegedly, 3-year letterman has a player who was born on a leap, on February the 29th. So he only has a birthday every 4 years. So he's sort of outsized. So maybe that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just think it's just so fascinating because in many other ways, we will call out this principle in so many other ways, but we won't do it here, and we'll do it where we won't do it in the name of being winsome. And the irony is, it's not very winsome if people are coming into a PCA church and are like, what's going on here? So yeah, I'll take it. I'll take my point for the first ever Danny Almonte reference on Presbycast.
All right. Well, your check's in the mail. Reed, any thoughts on this? I'm debating on whether to play the audio and video clips that I have. I don't want to appear to be beating up on people, but thoughts while I consider this.
All right. The thing that I keep coming back to is how does this work out practically? And we've talked. You've mentioned quasi elderesses and shadow government, and then you rightly acknowledged authority for the deacon. If we stop for a second and realize that our BCO is the best expression we can offer to put into practice the government of the church that Jesus gives us in the Bible, we can quibble over little details here and there, and there's a process consistent with our vows. And that's critical because then we have assurance that the Spirit will work through the ministry of the church, even with its weaknesses and its failures, etc. But when we do this kind of thing, and we just go and do what we want, or we say, well, I'm going to ignore it, or we say, well, taking vows is just our tradition, throw out the chapter in the confession on vows and oaths being a part of worship, then you end up with all of this, well, and a woman can do anything a non-ordained man can do in the worship service. And the answer is yes and no. There's two different functions in a publicly ordered worship service according to Scripture. And that would be those things which are deliverable functions and those which are receptive functions. The congregation is the ones who have the receptive functions. They receive the delivereds from the officers. And it is their job to be used of God, be used of the Holy Spirit as the means of grace. And so when you turn around and say, well, the non-ordained person can do anything, or woman can do anything a non-ordained man can do, the answer is, well, yes, but he's not allowed to do those things. He's not allowed to do the functions that are given to the ordained ministry, because that's a part of what the Holy Spirit promises to use. And when you ignore that, you're basically saying, we're going to present a ministry of the gospel without the presence of the Spirit. Turretin, I looked up Turretin. I think it's question 22 here. And his argument against those who would not affirm ordination, he mentions fanatics and enthusiasts. And if you go back and you look at that context, he learned that from his grandfather Calvin, right? We still have fanatics and enthusiasts today. Most of the evangelicals around us are premised on the idea of ministry is, hey, I've got a great idea. Let's try this.
It's free form.
Yeah, it's free form.
And creativity is not frowned upon, but creativity in church government, I think, should be frowned upon.
Well, we should be comfortable to say, well, Jesus has told me this, and I've got questions on the edges. I've got lack of clarity. Maybe we need some people who have studied it and can exegete the passages better to give us some insight that will help. But at the end of the day, our desire should be to go, let's stick with what we know God says he's going to use, like the reading of Scripture. I mean, we already say the preaching of Scripture. Okay, well, the reading of Scripture too. Well, if we're going to say the reading of Scripture, well, aren't the sacraments a means of grace? Well, yeah. Well, who's ordained to set those apart? Who's promised that the Spirit is going to work through their prayer of consecration? And then it just goes on from there.
Yeah, this is not really our topic, but no one who keeps up with this can deny that this is not also related to participation of non-ordained people in worship leadership. If you had a Venn diagram of churches with something like female shepherdesses, a powerful women's council who meet with the session and are heavily involved there, if churches with those polity innovations and churches who have non-ordained people, which is, I'm sorry, it's code for women, because the men are the ones who generally, the ruling elders really suffer in worship leadership where the role is given to non-ordained people, because they kind of disappear. They're chopped liver. But I've seen PCA worship services, believe it or not, in a large American city. It's a PCA church. Every portion of the service, including the benediction and the call to worship, except for the sermon text and the sermon, were led by an unordained person. And how do I know she was unordained? Because I don't think they were ordaining women in this PCA church. That's not prevalent, okay? That's not widespread, but it happens. And there are some influential churches that are doing this. So these issues are related.
Brad, I would even suggest that these public worship services may very well be the entry point, because they're easy to say, well, who's to say we can't do this? And then you get beyond that, and now you've got discipleship ministries, you've got witnessing ministries, and you've got all these things. I can't tell you how much I'm disappointed and saddened by the amount of pushing and teaching. It's old hat now, I know that. But when I first came down here in the late aughts, the very first thing the young women wanted to do was have the pastor's approval to do a Beth Moore study. And that was when she was, quote unquote, safe. And like,
well, see, you just don't like Beth Moore because she has that shtick about the hairbrush, and you don't need one. Am I wrong?
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but okay. So, but no, seriously, it's like, is God called women to that kind of ministry? And my wife and I were talking about it today, and my response was, well, they need to study the doctrine of Scripture deeply. I've got a daughter who has a Master of Arts in Religion from Westminster, Philly. This is not something that's foreign to me. They need to learn the doctrines of the Word deeply so that they can then turn around and disciple the less mature in the church in those particular functions that enable them to become better helpmeets. It's about the partnership. Even, we've got single women in our church. They're part of the partnership of the family in this local church. And they're not going to take on roles that are, God says, reserved for called men.
Yeah, and for ordained men.
Yes.
So let me make a point that everyone kind of thinks about, but we don't always say it. There are churches with full-blown unisex diaconates. There are denominations where that's normal and it's fine and it's non-controversial. That's an option for people. We get this strange thing. We sort of have a not the main line, but the midline. We have the EPC, ECO, a lot of mega churches, as we saw with Rick Warren, who got sort of kicked out of the the SBC over this for having females with pastor titles, which they felt free to make up, but they laid hands on women on the stage. That was kind of a big deal. But there are plenty of places to go, including ACNA, the Anglicans, many of them, if you want female officers who are equal, or maybe not quite equal in every way with the other officers. There's places to go, and the BCO can be changed. It's difficult. There are options for people that have these preferences rather than just skipping stuff or doing stuff that has no warrant. We kind of skipped over this at the beginning, but there are PCA churches, and I have a video I could play from General Assembly. I'm debating whether to do it, who admit that they don't ordain male deacons because it wouldn't be fair to the female members of the diaconate. So we have non-officer officers. I've got a recording from an assembly-wide seminar in 2009 kind of a sit down with Lig Duncan and Tim Keller. And Tim Keller admits that they stopped ordaining male deacons at some point at Redeemer. They may ordain them now. I think I've heard that they do, but who knows? And they've broken into 3 or 4 congregations, so maybe each does their own thing. I don't know. And he gave 2 reasons for why they stopped, and neither one of them really made sense to me. And I think that gave license, that gave permission. Let's just play it. Let's hear about a minute and a half of and again, this is not to drag Tim Keller. He's, the late Tim Keller. We're not speaking evil of the dead. We're letting him speak and tell us why he did a thing that seemed to give tacit permission and approval for others to do it. Because I think New York Presbytery, they used to get letters about this, but there was never any admonition or anything of that sort. So let's hear this. This is 2009 PCA General Assembly assembly-wide seminar.
Somebody out there is on the mic is giving.
Okay. Do our ordination vows require us to ordain deacons with the laying on of hands, and do both of your churches practice that specific thing?
Redeemer laid hands on our deacons for about half of our life. Several years ago, we stopped doing it. I thought that didn't mean we stopped ordaining them. Plenty of people think it does. As Ligon said, laying on of hands represents recognizing their gift. But, for example, if somebody said to me, no, the PCA has spoken with United through the SJC or the Constitutional Business, the PCA has spoken and said you can't call them deacons unless you lay hands on them too. You're violating the BCO, then I would just go back and say, fine. For quite a long time we laid hands on them. We haven't, and it's largely partly because some of our deacons asked us not to originally. And it was difficult for me to get around to all the services and kind of make the explanation. So it was actually a logistical, for me, it was actually logistically easier in some ways. However, I would be happy to go back to it. If somebody said, no, the PCA has made it very, very clear, you are not ordaining them if you don't lay hands on them. If you don't lay hands on them, you can't call them deacons. Well, I do want to call them deacons, and therefore I would do it. But it's not at all at the essence of what we do there. In other words, for the first 7-10 years of Redeemer's life, we laid hands on them. We didn't after, and that did not represent some kind of change in the way in which we operated.
Yes, I do think we should. I do think we're obligated by the book to ordain our male deacons, and we do lay hands on them in the ordination at First West.
All right, the last few words there were from Ligon Duncan. He was able to very simply answer that question. Tim Keller, great man. I don't think that was his best moment, not his clearest, and not his most helpful. So quick thoughts on that. That's a long time ago, but I think it was a powerful moment in the history of the PCA. Now, PCA's changed a lot in the last 5-6 years. I don't think you would hear that today, but that was an epochal, however you say it, moment for some, and it encouraged some people to go their own way, in my opinion. So, thoughts from any of you on that?
Brad?
Yes.
I think that it's fair to say that since then things have metastasized. The amount of churches that have their collection of shepherdesses, in which they're responsible. Other than what's going on in the public worship service, it almost looks like these women are responsible for all the ministry to any woman in the church. It starts there. It doesn't start with the session. It starts with whatever the women's council is. That's basically finding ways to work around what BCO says. And that's based on differing biblical convictions, if there actually are any fully developed biblical convictions to back up these preferences for practices. But if we just leave it at a BCO debate, I don't think we're going to be able to get people to see it. But if we emphasize you've made promises before the Lord to exercise his authority according to these standards, then I think we have the promise of the Spirit of convicting people for what it's worth.
All right, so it's you make an ethical case here, right? It's almost like preaching the law and hoping the Spirit will use it. Maybe this is the fourth use of the ecclesial law. We'll see. Dave? I know you've got something to say.
Sorry. Well, I want to agree with Reed. I think he was also making a biblical case. We don't need to have, chapter and verse in the BCO to know that certain things are true because we have the Bible. And so whether or not the BCO addresses every particular thing, and it can't, which is the point I was trying to make earlier, it can't and won't. We know what we need to be doing. A slightly less serious point. This group of deacons or aspiring deacons or deacons to be who say, no, Tim, please don't lay hands on me. Don't ordain me. I don't want that. That kind of reminds me of the supermodel girlfriend from Canada who nobody ever meets, but she totally exists. And so I just don't buy it. We can like do all the throat clearing about Tim Keller and his contributions to the church and blah blah blah. But no, this was not his best moment. This is not good. And you're right, Reed and Brad. You made this point as well. Yes, the slippery slope exists. Yes, it has metastasized. Yes, it has gotten worse. Yes, there are churches and sessions who have folks, ladies called shepherdesses, who are not operating outside the bounds of our standards or outside of the BCO or outside of even what is biblically prescribed or prohibited. But then we have some that are. And this is downstream of that, right? It doesn't improve over time. And as you come up close to a line and you say, I'm not going to cross this line now, eventually you will cross the line. If you keep staying there, you've got to back up from the line, right? If you spend your whole time, and Wilson can correct me on a sports ball analogy, that, if you spend all your time defending the goal line and you're always on your one, at some point you're going to get a safety. At some point you're going to, you're not going to defend it. You're going to have someone punch in from the one and do a dance on your face. And this is kind of where we're at with this, where it's just too much for too long. In any event, I take back the sports ball thing. I was not an athlete like Wilson, but I was an athlete. Anyway, we'll leave it at that.
Dave, my definition of the slippery slope is gravity plus total depravity. But you've added a helpful dimension in there, time. Things move. Things don't move instantly. It takes time. It doesn't take long to fall down from 100 feet down into a ravine, but it does take some time. If no time passes, you're not going to fall. So maybe it should be total depravity plus gravity over time. But yeah.
I had this thought, and maybe it's too provocative, I don't know, but let's not forget that people come to our churches because they want to be in a church that's conservative. They want to be in a church that is that has biblical preaching, that's doctrinally sound, and it's a safe place for them. They know that there won't be deviations from Scripture, and polity is part of that, and it's part of our job as under shepherds to monitor that, just as we monitor for doctrinal error. And so, I think people are scandalized by these things, and I don't know that necessarily moves the elders who are, who are finding loopholes and things like that. But one thought that I did have was that I don't think it's inaccurate to say that the Christian nationalism movement or the patriarchal movement, or whatever you want to call it, is really an overreaction to these kinds of things. I talked with one of our members, and he feels convicted that sex roles being twisted or adjusted, inappropriately, that's a door towards liberalism. And I think our people are watchful for these things in a way that we don't appreciate necessarily. And I think it's especially the ruling elder's job is to know that. And maybe there is some element of that overreaction that's a reaction to these kind of movements in our churches that people strongly disagree with.
Some people say, well, in the comments, well, this is not about education. This is not about information. This is just, people being unethical. But I think there is a problem with elders and officers who are half convinced. When I was in high school, I was a photographer for a long time, and I worked at a camera store, and I worked part time, and I'm 17, 18 years old, and I'm selling cameras, and this woman is buying a camera from me, and they don't have camera stores anymore. That doesn't exist. But she says, you're really sincere. I'd buy anything from you. And I thought, what is this? I had no, as a 17, 18-year-old, I had no idea what to make of that. But if you're an elder and you're not convinced of our polity, you're not going to sell it to anybody. If you're apologetic about it, yeah, I know this is a little, this is kind of rough. Just all the men and stuff. We're trying to do something about that. We're trying to involve everyone. That sends a message. But if you don't understand it, you can't sell it either. You've got to know what you're talking about. So part of the problem could well be ruling elders who don't understand or believe it, or both. And it's not just the pastors, because a young pastor can come in, if there's a solid session there and they've got conviction, they're probably gonna, that's what you're gonna get. The pastor does not have, or shouldn't have, unlimited power in a PCA church. They set an agenda, or try to. But boy, the officers, the lay officers, some people don't like that term, are chosen by the congregation and taken very similar vows to the ministers and ordained by the laying on of hands. We hope they have power in the church. We talk about the plurality and the parity of the offices, the elders, parity of elders, ruling elders having the same vote in the courts of the church as the teaching elders or pastors. So I wouldn't downplay the importance of understanding, and certainly not of conviction on these matters. And it's important because it's the most important thing in the world. Christians are not going to be carried. They're not going to make it on their own, and we can't just make it up. The church is where it's at. The church is a matter of life and death. Some of us have personally experienced that. Some of us have had things happen in our life that without the church we probably just wouldn't have made it. That's not the case for everyone, but ultimately it is. Outside of which there's no ordinary possibility of salvation. So if the church is that important, how it's ordered, who her officers are, and what they do is just about the most important thing in the world, and we don't have to apologize for that. So any concluding comments? We're pretty much up against our time. As normal, we've kind of been all over the place, but I think we've covered most everything. Certainly not to anyone's satisfaction. We haven't thrown specific churches and people under the bus. We let Tim Keller speak for himself, which I think is fair. I don't know that he qualified much of that in later years, or took it back, so I don't apologize for putting that out there as it is. He had an article in By Faith the year before that, 2008-9. These were big issues, and didn't mention in it, as he made the case for commissioning elders. Deaconesses, and didn't mention that they don't ordain, which I thought was a little strange. Also, just to throw this in, I've written about it. Jared Nelson's written about it. You hear some kind of fanciful things about, well, the RPCS had female deacons. Well, no, they didn't. They did not have a unisex diaconate. It's much more. Some of the history is a lot more complicated than we like to think. A lot of this is mainline influence more than coming from a church like the RPCES. But that's too complicated for us to get into here. But the truth is out there. That's one of the. Is that the X Files? I'm not sure. So this is the Presby Files, and the truth is out there, but we don't have all of it or have time to dispense all of it, and it wouldn't be all true the way we said it anyway. So, closing thoughts from any of our all-star panel.
Brad, as usual, thank you for bringing it up and giving us the opportunity to discuss it.
My thoughts are, I think I read this quote by Jonathan Landry Cruz every time we do when people join the church.
And we're not sure that Harrison Perkins and Jonathan Landry Cruz aren't the same person. They've never been seen together. But
yeah, I just can't confirm nor deny. So, but he says in his book, Church Membership, after all, a Christian is one who claims to love Christ. But how can we say we really love Christ if we don't love what he loves? And he goes on to say, have you considered that there is nothing in this entire world that Jesus loves more than the church? I mean, it's hard to think that we would relax matters in the church, even in the name of the graciousness of the grace of the gospel. But man, I mean, if Christ loves the church, then we ought to love it and have the highest standard for it. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, Stuart Robinson called the church an essential element of the gospel. It's not really part of the gospel proclamation, but it's a benefit of the gospel. That's what he meant, I think. And it's it's a book title, and it's just helpful because it provokes thought and emphasizes the importance of the church. And like my senior pastor likes to say, if you don't have officers, you don't have a church. With a Presbyterian church without a session, and that's something you can get into with something I wrote recently. Without ordained deacons, the elders are supposed to do everything that the deacons would do, and that's a crisis. That's a problem, and I've written about that recently. Maybe I'll link to that in the so-called show notes. Noel?
Yeah, I think the frustration for a lot of us is where to start with problems that we see. I think I guess my advice would be to be involved at Presbytery, be at Presbytery, know the men, participate in committees so they know you. I think we don't want to be men who just fly in out of nowhere and attack. We want to be listeners. We want to know explanations for things. We want to be inquisitive without just raising hackles. So that's my advice: is just be known by the men in your presbytery, and we can't do that if we're not there.
Yeah, and if you're against something, it's good to explain why. I often vote against a certain exception that people are granted, and I like to explain why, so people don't just think I'm the crazy guy that always votes no. There's more. You can still like these people and get along with them, try to understand them, but our order is what it is, and we believe it's biblical, and we want to try to convince other people of that. So I thank all of you for joining us. I think I hope it's encouraging to.
Brad, before we go, can I add one thing?
Without objection, so ordered.
Noel alluded to this. You were mentioning it as a brother who's I think in the chat has mentioned many times before. Elders need to be churchmen, and it's very good to be at Presbytery. It's very good to know the other elders. It's very good to be involved. It's very good to know them at that level. But the PCA is a church. It's not a denomination, it's a church. And we have seen in the last couple of years, drama after drama, scandal after scandal. And but for the presence of faithful elders on some of these committees of commissioners, and on the permanent committees, and going and showing up, and being there when it matters. And this isn't precisely on point as we're talking about ordination and so on, but it's all of a piece, right? The Venn diagram between some of the latitudinarian practices, some of the lapses in orthodoxy, these things, they overlap. And so we need to show up. We need to be involved. And we can't just be functional congregationalists, whether it's being a Presbyterian, showing up to committees of commissioners, showing up and doing the work. It's hard sometimes to get to GA, taking time off of work and taking time away from your business and so on. But as Mel Duncan likes to say, be a churchman, get involved. If you're looking for a prescription, that's the prescription. You can't just sit around and say, well, my post on X got 400 likes, so I'm moving the needle, I'm saving the PCA. No, you're not. I mean, it's fine to be influential on social media, but let's show up. Let's be Presbyterian.
All right. Well, speaking of influential on social media, or Resby, you've got the most important, it's important as a pilot to be able to take off, but landing the plane, very important. And that's your job around here. It just is.
I like to think of this show as a justification for the use of autopilot. So we take off. You robots talk for the duration, and then we land, and everyone disembarks, and you can go get, Qdoba or Starbucks in the terminal as you wait for your departure. So, thank you everyone for joining along and listening, watching, whatever. It's our first official show of the fall season as temperatures get a little bit cooler. Hopefully you all enjoy that. So while you enjoy that, just remember, don't be an Erdman.
God made him strong. The devil tried to fool him, but the deacon did no wrong. The devil couldn't make him sin, 'cause Job trusted in God. The deacon trusted in God. Yes, the deacon trusted in God. The deacon trusted in God.
What's wrong with you people?